Hello. Simon Jenkins looks like he's written another article on cannabis, marijuana. To follow up yesterday's, obesity is a greater threat for millennials than cannabis. It's absurd. That was the link for yesterday's. And I went straight to the comments, as I normally do. And I got so confused that I thought, I've just got to read this article to find out if this Simon Jenkins is a good guy or a bad guy. And I'm going to read the whole article to you and tell you what I think. Can Britain ever kill its worst taboo? Bad start, but this week's news of the soaring prevalence of skunk in place of weaker and less harmful herbal forms of cannabis is appalling. That's an appalling start. With weaker and less harmful herbal forms of cannabis, the implication, I think, is that skunk is not a herbal form, which is odd. With other news of prison chaos due to an epidemic of artificial cannabis, spice, government drugs policy is devoid of coherence and clearly lethal. Death from drugs misuse are now at an all-time high. That is, what I would be advising here is that an expert, and he's as close to an expert as the journalist people are going to get, should not do mashups of paragraphs like that. There are bad bits in it. Worst taboo is a bad start. I don't know what that's meant to be about at all. Less harmful herbal forms of cannabis is odd. But the worst thing and the absolute crime in this is chaos due to an epidemic of artificial cannabis spice. Now, I haven't checked, so you can tell me below if you know more or betterer. Spice, I think, was one of these legal high type things. Now, if in the beginning every single packet of spice that ever went out had artificial cannabis written on it, and every single pack that you can get now, well, now it's illegal, it used to be legal, now it's illegal, that you get on the street and it's still got artificial cannabis scribbled on it, does not make it artificial cannabis. That's it. And you think, well, it's just talking names, that's not important. It is fucking important. Cannabis is cannabis, and spice is whatever spice is made of. It could be made of plastic for all I know. It's different. It's like saying peanut butter is artificial broccoli. You can say it, but it doesn't make any sense. Spice, okay, let's just go for straight. Spice is not artificial cannabis, all right? It's not. Spice is an absolute horror show. It's a completely different ball game. It's like crack. All right, it's over here with crack when marijuana's over here, or what are we calling it? Cannabis. Cannabis is over here. Different ball game. Should not be in the same paragraph, because the whole article is going to want clarity from the government. You will not get clarity from the government unless there is clarity put into the government. And that opening paragraph is not clarity. Okay, you can tell the state of a society, said Alix de Tocqueville, by its prisons. Today you tell it by its attitude to drugs. 10 years ago, the Labour government recklessly upgraded cannabis from Class C to Class B because of concerns of its impact on mental health. Then they were minimal. After reclassification, police evidence is that 95% of cannabis used is now skunk. Older forms of weed are now vanishing. I'll just let that go by. Because didn't we touch on it yesterday? One of the reasons I had to go up here, because down in the comments they were still going on about how they use flower now, as in the flower buds, where in the old days they used to use the leaf, and the flower buds are so much stronger than the leaf. And you go, fuck me. How is anybody going to make any sense of anything unless they understand the subject? Seeing I've said it. Broccoli again. Broccoli, it's not dissimilar. It's a lot smaller for marijuana. You get a broccoli head, which is your broccoli. That's your weed. The active substances kind of grows on that. Call it the flowers. Flower. It's the flower, it's the bud. Round the bud, there are... It's like broccoli. You could use the small leaves around the flower of the broccoli in a salad. But you wouldn't really, because you cut the broccoli head off and you eat the broccoli. It's pretty much the same with marijuana, but because it's more expensive, you use the leaf anyway. I won't go into it any further. But just the small little leaves around the flowers, not the great big leaves. Shake. Don't worry about it. Older forms of weed are vanishing. I regard drugs as the most serious, avoidable cause of mental disorder, misery, crime and punishment, and have done my time on drug reform committees, including the 2000 Police Foundation inquiry. We advised downgrading, though sadly not legalisation, of cannabis. That's back in 2000. Labour's Home Secretary Jack Straw was horrified, and his successors reacted by upgrading cannabis. So he's been at he was on a committee 18 years ago, so he's as close to an expert as they come. For the press. All evidence I saw on narcotics led to two conclusions. One is that most psychoactive drugs, which include psychoactive drugs, I don't think you can have a drug that's not psychoactive, can you? Wouldn't make sense. Which include psychoactive drugs, which include alcohol and nicotine. So we've got alcohol, or nicotine, alcohol, and cannabis, like that. Grouped together. And you've got spice and crack and heroin over here. And we won't talk about LSD today. One is that most psychoactive drugs, which include alcohol and nicotine, are a bad idea, and some are unquestionably dangerous. The other is that, since suppression is impossible because people always want to get off their tits, criminalisation leaves supply in the hands of crooks and is therefore a menace. It creates crime at every point in the market and makes all drugs more dangerous, as prohibition did alcohol. The answer is legalisation and control. Basically, what we've got is what they seem to call skunk in the UK. Okay, that's what they call it. They call street dope, weed, skunk. And it's stronger in the UK for the reasons I said. It's the equivalent of moonshine was in the prohibition days in the United States. British drug consumption has marginally fallen over the past decade, but with a shift from softer drugs to harder ones. That's fair enough to say, as long as you lay out very clearly what are soft drugs, what are medium drugs, what are hard drugs, and why. The rise of chemical and synthetic drugs that are easy to adulterate. And then we go, as for skunk, and it's in the same paragraph. Marty DeForty of King's College London said of this week's findings, it's Marta, girl. The increase of high-potency cannabis on the streets poses a significant hazard to users' mental health. It induces personality changes, memory loss, and deterioration. It can wreck young lives. It's like young lives. If at 15 you start drinking moonshine, you're well likely to have mental health problems. If at 15 you start smoking skunk, you're well likely to have mental health problems. Well likely. Yeah, let's even go with well likely. It's probably over the top, but let's go with well likely. At 15, when your brain's all mushy, you don't want to be hitting it with too much psychoactive. Moonshine and skunk is too much psychoactive. If you hit it with cider, or if you hit it with 60s, I know there's a lot of discussion in the comments about 60s actually being as strong, but let's just say 60s old weed bud that was reasonably high in THC, when you say high in THC, high single figures, and with a reasonable CBD content. A 15-year-old, it'll be rare for a 15-year-old to go whoopee on the old hippie stuff. Like it's rare for a teenager to go whoopee on cider. But because there are a lot of teenagers, so you get a lot of quantity of people, then you'll get whoopiness from 15-year-olds doing anything. You can say skateboarding, but we're talking about substances, so psychoactive substances, so let's keep it sensible. It induces personality changes, memory loss, and deterioration. Basically, if you give 15-year-olds moonshine, understandable. Best to try and avoid that. Narcotics will never be eliminated, nor have they ever been, but driving them undercover makes it impossible to license or monitor quality. The government cannot even police its own prisons. Britain's most concentrated market for spice, again, and the lethal opioid fentanyl. They're a different ball game, and it should be so clearly said on every single article just what a different ball game these things are, because people are stupid and they will just lump things together and go marijuana, fentanyl and spice, all the same. Why should they differentiate between the three if the expert hasn't differentiated between the three? While some police forces such as Durham have, along with most prison governors, de facto decriminalised cannabis by declining to prosecute possession, others are less liberal. Even outside prison, the police over the past 5 years have reportedly locked up 30,000 cannabis users overnight at a cost of $13.5 million. Okay, that's if you do the math on that, that is really not much. 30,000 locked up overnight in 5 years. Compare that to America, where they're fucking crazy. And it's a cost of $13.5 million. But what it is, it's a slap on the wrist for somebody caught in possession of cannabis. It's reasonable. And then straight into a sentence on spice. As for spice, last year Manchester police recorded 58 ambulance call-out to victims in one weekend alone. The NHS must sweep up the Home Secretary's mess. You're starting to get it. You go from 30,000 cannabis users, overnight cost, locked up, $13.5 million, 5 years. Spice, last year in one city, police recorded 58 ambulance calls out in one weekend. Ambulance call out. There's nothing wrong with the 30,000 cannabis people locked up. They're just unfortunately sitting spaced out in their police cells. But this is ambulance call out in one weekend, 58 in one weekend in one city. But the two sentences just run into each other without, which is, what I'm trying to do here, to clearly state they are obviously wildly different substances, or you wouldn't get those two wildly different sentences. Okay, cool down, Nick. It's just education. It's advising people of facts. Every move towards liberalising Britain's drug laws is opposed by every government. Reform has been proposed by doctors, backbenchers, police chiefs and press, and pressure groups from right to left. Even the Mail on Sunday once featured a Maori poll supporting legislation. Yet in 2014, when MPs investigated foreign experience with legislation, the Home Secretary, she's not President, Prime Minister Theresa May, was so scared of the findings, she sought to censor publication. She reflected a deep cultural aversion to letting other people enjoy or make a mess of their own lives. Her attitude to drugs was, like the Saudi attitude to women, an ungrained prejudice, deaf to reason. And if you read that, it's not quite right, is it? Or it's what I've been talking about, advice. These are as a report on experiences from other jurisdictions. Come in. She was so scared of the findings she sought to censor publication. Didn't want to know herself, didn't want anybody else to know. I don't think it's like the Saudi attitude to women, ingrained prejudice. I don't think that's it. It's something else. It's a non-desire to be educated. Maybe it's... Well, I know she has, as Home Secretary, she did go in for some of this prohibition stuff, so she doesn't want to be proved wrong. There's still a bit to go, unfortunately. Oh, we're in 17 minutes. Oh, well. I'll do, tell you what I'll do. Because this would take me an age to upload. I'll just downgrade its quality somehow. But then, if you're not interested in drugs, you certainly won't have got this far, so we'll see how we go. British policy is now completely adrift of the rest of the Western world. It is light years behind Donald Trump's America, where half the states have legalised cannabis to some degree. Is it already half the states? Crumbs. In 1990, that's a little while ago, Trump himself said you have to legalise drugs to win the war. Even today, he supports medical cannabis. In California, recreational marijuana will be freely available in licensed premises from next month. The US cannabis market is predicted to reach $50 billion in 10 years. Colorado state revenues have already been transformed by an annual $200 million in drug taxes, with the money going to schools and clinics. There are even courses for cannabis sommelier. In other words, you just go and choose, oh, well, that's got a bit of this is a bit of this. And they've all got well fancy names. It's quite fun, really. Canada is bidding to become a major producer of marijuana. Canada. Seems odd, because you need quite a lot of sunshine, so I imagine they're using their cheap energy to do it under LED lighting. In Portugal, the Netherlands, Denmark, Switzerland and Germany, almost everywhere, hard and soft drugs are being brought under state regulation. Bit of a funny sentence still. In the Netherlands, there is no market for synthetic cannabis. Synthetic cannabis. Could strangle anybody that says synthetic cannabis. As the real stuff is legal. As in, spice never took off because they could get normal weed. Dutch prisons are being closed down, really, or rented to Norway to keep going. Of course, experience is mixed. a common mistake is to legalize consumption but leave supply criminalized, unlicensed and therefore untested. Absolutely. The whole thing here is to get it to be like Colorado, where you could have sommelier having little tastes of this, that and the other, to experience, to realize that all the experiences you can have with it. And if you experience a bad experience, you don't go there again. You go to this one. Well, okay. In some countries, consumption has risen, in others fallen. Well, is one necessarily bad, or is one necessarily good? If you make marijuana in Colorado legal and consumption rises, is that bad? Or is it good? I believe the only thing I know about it is, I think, well, obviously the use of marijuana's gone up. I think the use of alcohol's gone down, and there's going to be a bit of a stink about that probably. Nowhere has society collapsed. Everywhere drug-related crime has been reduced. As it is, the market booms thanks the market booms thanks to the internet. The UN Drugs Agency last year recorded some 700 new psychoactive substances. Well, not surprised. I mean, it's easy, isn't it, to mix things up in a lab. But then never marijuana, or even synthetic marijuana. Flooding both the open and dark web. Britain's response, almost unique, is to turn a blind eye and leave its virtually open market unpoliced. I bet it hasn't. I bet the police wouldn't like that. But yeah, they doesn't sound like they're being very forward. The 2016 Psychoactive Substances Act on legal highs made no effort to discriminate good from bad. I think you should do a bit more yourself, but okay. You understand the problem anyway. It's just banned everything, except, of course, alcohol. It pretended that something had to be done. Last paragraph. Back in 2002, a certain opposition MP pleaded for an end to Britain's lowest common denominator approach to drugs, to posturing with tough policies and a crackdown after crackdown, all to no effect. The MP was David Cameron, who went on to oversee the passage of the 2016 Act when he was Prime Minister. The truth is that the prevalence of harmful drugs in Britain is not caused by policy, it's caused by politicians. It's a shame he couldn't come up with a more snappy end to that article. I mean, it was all right as an article, because, okay, the article was more about policy than it was about the drugs, but no article should be written by somebody who knows what they're talking about. That doesn't clearly leave the reader clearly understanding differences between different drugs, because until that's clearly understood, there won't be any clear policy from politicians.